Mcglaughlin.
Mr. Speaker, I was not supposed to be here. Every account of polling predictions said that Glasgow North East was the least winnable seat for the SNP. Yet here I am, standing before you, not just as the MP for Glasgow North East, but as the one who broke the BBC swingometer. Mr. Speaker, I have the curious distinction of being able to present myself to the House as the biggest swinger in UK political Lest you think I say this to be boastful, let me be clear. That 39.3% swing only happened because I had the most incredible campaign team behind me, some of whom are in the gallery today. A team that grew from the original Proven 57 team, so-called after we secured 57%, the second highest yes vote in Scotland in the independence referendum last year. Mr. Speaker, there are many pretty pockets in Glasgow North East, such as Hogganfield Loch, the tenements of Denniston, and many fine parks basking in sunshine one day of the year. But I would not expect to see much of my constituency in a Visit Scotland brochure. And sadly today, residents of my constituency are never very far from a derelict building or waste ground. The best and worst example of both beauty and dereliction being the Winter Gardens in Springburn Park. It seems to me that the Scottish Parliament's Community Empowerment Act was written with my constituency in mind, and I look forward to working with those communities as they empower themselves and transform the constituency. What we do have in abundance in my constituency is resilient people. From projects that have risen from the despair, like Love Milton, to Ricasey Poverty Action Group, St Roch's Football Club, who I should mention not only give free community space to all community groups in their area, but also gave me a free season ticket. To the Everlasting Arms Food Bank, that's a declaration. That was my declaration. To the Everlasting Arms Food Bank, based in the street in which I live in Denniston, an African church feeding local people. And where we have little by way of splendid mountains, we have our gargantuan industrial heritage to be proud of. Springburn was once the greatest centre of railway manufacturing in the whole of Europe. And we have a political history that makes Glasgow North East irresistible to someone like myself. William Wallace was captured in Rob Royston, from where he was brought to Westminster Hall, tried, found guilty of treason, and hung, drawn and quartered. It was not possible to quarter James Wilson, John Baird and Andrew Hardy, known collectively as the 1820 martyrs and now resting in Sighthill Cemetery. A furious crowd made it impossible after they were hanged for leading the uprising for social justice and workers' rights in that year. Today I pay tribute to the memories of the 1820 martyrs who ought to be afforded the same courtesy and remembrance as the Tolpuddle martyrs rightly are, but are not, possibly because their mantra, Scotland free or a desert, gives away the fact that they also campaigned for Scotland's independence. My honourable friends on these benches are constantly inviting other members to visit their constituency, so I would invite anyone who believes in what the 1820 martyrs fought for and is ashamed of the fate that befell them to visit their final resting place in Sighthill, and I will be delighted to accompany you. Despite having lived in Glasgow all of my adult life, I grew up in Greenock and Port Glasgow, shipbuilding towns, and I vividly remember second year at Port Glasgow High School. Every Monday morning, more and more of my friends would return from their weekends to report that their parents had lost their jobs. Mr. Speaker, my adolescence was spent with Margaret Thatcher in charge. It was bad enough being a teenager without having to witness your town and its world-class industries fall apart at the seams. I will never forget the feeling of powerlessness in my area, the fear that my friends felt, the despair of their parents, and I remember hearing rhetoric from politicians and the media about people not wanting to work, about unemployment being a lifestyle choice, something disgracefully repeated in this House last week by the Chancellor in his attempts to justify his attacks on working people who have nothing. I knew, because I was there, that it was not a lifestyle choice, that in fact worklessness was sapping the life from people. I realised then that it was in somebody's interests for people with little to believe that people with less were a threat to them. I opened my eyes and they've been wide open ever since. At one point in school, I was practically the only person in class whose parents were working, because mine worked in a sadly growing industry. They were psychiatric nurses. And let us not pretend that this government's recent decisions will not lead to an increase in people suffering poor mental health, because it will. I suspect my predecessor, Willie Bain, had much the same opinion as me on that. He was, after all, a Labour member who campaigned over the 6 years in this House on youth unemployment and spoke up in support of people who found themselves long-term unemployed. And he was a strong advocate of the living wage. We no doubt shared much of our political aims. We just disagreed on how to get there, and I wish him well. I come from good political stock, Mr Speaker. My late father, Bobby Mcglaughlin, was an independence-supporting Republican who curiously served 12 years in the British Armed Forces. More canny than curious, as it turns out, when it was revealed that he only joined voluntarily, because otherwise he'd have had to have done national service and he'd have got a third less in his wage packet.
Canny Scott.
My late maternal grandparents, Stuart and Sarah Purdy, were founding members of Greenock SNP. He was a strong trade unionist and he led many a walkout. I know he would want me to send a message of support, as I do today, to the 70 striking homelessness caseworkers in Glasgow City Council, now in their 16th week. My paternal grandfather, John Mcglaughlin, was a labourer who was blacklisted for being a member of the Communist Party. Unable to find work, he taught himself to read and write, and he spent his days fighting and writing for the rights of people who were unable to fight for themselves. Fantastic. My late brother Stephen dabbled in many left-wing and anarchist groups even whilst living in London. He often encouraged me to stand for Westminster, probably so he could see more of me. And my mother, thankfully still with us, simply taught me that I was as good as anybody else. No better, no worse, but as good as. There is a lesson there for Scotland. Mr Speaker, I think I must have been destined to be a politician, because I certainly didn't set out to be one. I wanted to be an actress, and I spent 3 years at the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. It was not the green benches of Westminster I was aiming for, it was those in the Rover's Return on Coronation Street.
Still time.
I know this. Sometimes I still wonder which has got the better actors. I often think of those 1820 martyrs, Mr Speaker, and I wonder what they would see today if they could rise up from their resting place in Sighthill. They would see that 23.2% of the people in Glasgow North East exist on welfare benefits, more than twice the UK average, that we have the 10th highest rate of unemployment in the whole of the United Kingdom. They would see child poverty lying at a disgraceful 38%, and in some areas even higher, again more than double the UK average. Do my constituents deserve that? They would see that most of the power to tackle that poverty still lies here in Westminster. They would have seen a Tory Chancellor last weekend twisting the knife deeper still into people already on their knees. And they would have seen the MP who represents those people sat in this chamber wondering what on earth she was doing here, as the policies her country had roundly rejected were steamrollers through. Mr Speaker, I'm an adaptable person. I can fight my instinct to clap if I have to, sitting here in the SNP quarter of... I can adjust to the rather strange animal noises. I'm sure one day I'll get used to my London perm. It's straight when I leave the house. As soon as I step out, it becomes a 1980s perm. And I can even cope just about with the occasional yaboo tit-for-tat style politics in this House. But I will never adjust to hearing members cheer on a Chancellor as he announces taking away the lifelines of many of my constituents. Sink or swim. That was the message from last week's budget. I thought about my constituents watching from home. I thought about family members and friends I care deeply about. I imagined their pain, and I could not hold back the tears, knowing that I was powerless, almost powerless, to help them. And I was not the only one on these benches in tears. Yeah, good enough. So I want people at home to know that when they feel pain, we on these benches are feeling that pain with them. I may no longer be experiencing what they experience, but I have been there and I remember that. When they are in distress, we are distressed with them. Mr Speaker, I want them to know that we are on their side and that we will always fight for them in this place, tooth and nail. Mr Speaker, when I talk of my constituents, I mean every single one of them, wherever they came from, however they got here. And in Glasgow North East, we have a significant immigrant population, from Irish to Pakistani, from Indian and Sri Lankan to African. I'm delighted to represent such an ethnically diverse area. My own partner, Graham Campbell, is an English, Scottish, Jamaican socialist who led Africans for an independent Scotland during the referendum. Scotland's referendum engaged everyone. Last week, I sat through the summing up of the Immigration Minister in a debate in Westminster Hall, and in the 10 minutes allocated, not a single second was used to say anything positive about immigrants. In my time in this place, I will share many stories that will not just pay lip service to immigrants, but demonstrate exactly why it is so important for us to welcome people from other countries and other cultures. Today we are speaking about evil, and I want to share some of my thoughts, which, whilst not exactly evil, are not entirely positive either. I've heard much from the benches opposite that we have our Scottish Parliament, and so why should England not have the same? And I agree. But do the members opposite understand what we in Scotland had to do to get our Parliament? We had to campaign for years. We had to persuade this place. We had to persuade the other place. And in both places, there was intense scrutiny of the legislation. There were amendments. There were debates. And most importantly, we had to persuade those who we consider to be sovereign. And as my honourable friend from Glenrothes has just said, that is the people of Scotland. So how can it be in order for what some members seem to think is the equivalent in England to come about merely as a change to standing orders in this House? The entire Parliament, not to mention the people of England, should have the right to consider and amend any legislation relating to it. Mr Speaker, I will be constructive in this place, but I won't do anything that goes against the interests of my constituents or the interests of Scotland. That said, my political interests are far-reaching. I'm delighted to be my party's spokesperson for civil liberties. I often say civil disobedience, but I don't really mean it. I will work to support people whose lives have been affected by addictions and mental health problems. I will fight racism and any attack on equality. I will fight for the most vulnerable people in this world, including those incarcerated at Dungavel and Yarlswood. I will support calls for reparations for those countries who suffered most from our involvement in the slave trade, namely the Caribbean countries. And locally, I will offer practical support in two ways. My office will employ a funding officer who will support those voluntary groups, providing lifelines for local people to access funding, and a welfare rights specialist to defend people with no money from cruel cuts and shocking benefit sanctions. Mr Speaker, I pledge to devote my time in here to making a real and practical difference to real people.
Thank you. Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and it's a great pleasure to follow the maiden speech for the member, the Honourable Lady for Glasgow North East, who is clearly going to be a strong voice for her constituents.